The morning had a quiet, familiar rhythm. Sunlight filtered softly through the windows of the small downtown diner, casting a warm glow over the checkered floor and the worn wooden tables. The smell of fresh coffee and sizzling bacon filled the air, blending with the faint aroma of toasted bread. The diner was not flashy, and it did not try to be. It was the kind of place where people came for comfort, a friendly smile, and a simple meal that reminded them of home. Among the regulars, a young waitress moved with a quiet efficiency, balancing plates and cups without a single misstep. Her movements were precise but unhurried, and her gentle smile made customers feel welcome. She had a way of noticing the little things, how someone liked their eggs, when someone needed an extra napkin, or when someone wanted to talk about their day. To anyone watching, she seemed ordinary, part of the background, the type of person people took for granted. On that particular morning, however, the usual calm of the diner was about to be interrupted. The bell above the door jingled, and all heads turned as a man entered. He was sharply dressed, a tailored suit that seemed to command attention, polished shoes that clicked on the floor with authority, and an expensive watch glinting on his wrist. There was a confidence in his stride, a subtle air that said he was used to being noticed, used to people paying attention when he entered a room. There was also a hint of arrogance in the way he looked around, scanning the diner as though he were inspecting it for imperfections rather than enjoying it. The waitress noticed him but did not let his presence disturb her rhythm. She continued to take orders and serve food with the same care she had for every other customer. He moved toward a booth near the window, his eyes never leaving her, and for a moment, it was clear that he had already decided he would make this encounter interesting. He seemed to be sizing her up, wondering if this quiet young woman could match his expectations or if she would crumble under his scrutiny. He waved her over with a confident gesture, and she approached, keeping her expression neutral, professional, and polite. He looked at her carefully, his eyes measuring, as if he were evaluating every detail, her posture, the way she held her pen, even the tone of her voice. There was a faint smirk on his face, one that suggested he thought he was about to amuse himself at her expense. "I'd like the special," he said, in a tone that suggested he expected immediate compliance. But he didn't stop there. He leaned slightly forward, as though preparing to test her further. "But make sure it's done exactly right. No mistakes. I'm very particular." She nodded calmly. "Of course, I'll make sure it's perfect." There was no hesitation, no sign that she was intimidated. She moved away smoothly, jotting down the order and delivering it to the kitchen with the same care she put into every task. He leaned back in his seat, observing her with a mixture of curiosity and amusement. To him, this was going to be a simple experiment, a chance to see how someone ordinary handled the attention of someone extraordinary. He thought he would catch her off guard, perhaps confuse her, maybe even make her flustered. It was not that he wanted to be cruel, but he liked the idea of testing people, seeing how they reacted when they were under pressure, when they faced someone who exuded confidence and authority. The waitress, meanwhile, moved through the diner with effortless grace. She served a table of elderly patrons, her smile warm, her words gentle. She remembered the small details, the way one man liked his coffee black and strong, the woman who always wanted extra sugar in her tea. There was no hurry in her movements, no sense of panic or pressure. She was in her element, doing what she knew best, and yet there was an awareness in her eyes that hinted she could see more than what was on the surface. The millionaire watched her closely, almost in disbelief. She was calm, composed, and unflustered. Each movement she made, each interaction she had with other customers, seemed effortless, as if she had been doing this her whole life. And in that effortless way, there was a quiet strength, a subtle intelligence that he had not anticipated. It was the kind of intelligence that did not boast or shout but was clear in observation and in action. He decided to push a little further, testing her directly. "Could you explain why the special comes with that side dish?" he asked, his tone lightly challenging, expecting perhaps a nervous stumble or an uncertain reply. She paused for a brief moment, giving him her full attention, and then explained clearly and concisely. The chef pairs it with that side because it complements the flavors and balances the richness of the main dish. It's a combination that's been carefully chosen to enhance the overall experience. Her tone was polite but confident, and her words were thoughtful. She was not just reciting instructions. She was demonstrating understanding. He raised an eyebrow, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. This was not the reaction he had expected. He leaned back, intrigued, and decided to continue. "And what if I asked for something different, something unusual?" he pressed, testing the waters, curious to see if she would falter under unexpected demands. She smiled slightly, not in mockery but in acknowledgement. "We can usually accommodate special requests. It might take a little longer, and I'd need to check with the kitchen, but I'll make sure it's done right." Again, there was no hesitation, no sign that she was unsettled. She simply stated the facts and offered a solution, calm and composed. Around them, the diner carried on with its usual rhythm. Other customers were chatting, laughing, and enjoying their meals. The background noise created a sense of normalcy that contrasted sharply with the tension building in the booth near the window. The millionaire found himself intrigued in a way he hadn't anticipated. He had walked in expecting to be amused, perhaps to prove something to himself, and instead he was being challenged in a subtle, unexpected way. As the minutes passed, he tried another tactic, a bit more pointed this time. "Do you ever get tired of people making mistakes, of people not appreciating your work?" he asked, almost rhetorically, but with a slight edge of curiosity. He thought this would be a trap, a way to get her to admit insecurity or frustration. She looked at him directly, her eyes steady, and replied thoughtfully, "Everyone makes mistakes. It's part of being human. My job is to do my best and to help people enjoy their time here. If something goes wrong, I fix it. If it goes right, I enjoy it along with them. That's what matters." He blinked, momentarily taken aback. This was not the reaction he had predicted. She was not defensive, she was not intimidated, and she was certainly not impressed by his status. She simply spoke with clarity and purpose, showing insight and poise that he had not expected from someone he assumed was ordinary. At that moment, he realized that he was facing something different from what he had imagined. He had come into the diner thinking he was the observer, the one in control, ready to test someone's abilities for his own amusement. Instead, he found himself confronted with competence, intelligence, and confidence that quietly demanded respect. The roles he had assumed were about to shift, and he could feel it in the way the conversation flowed, in the way she handled each question, each challenge without hesitation. The waitress moved to serve another table, her presence graceful and unassuming. She interacted with the other patrons with the same warmth and attentiveness, never letting the millionaire's presence disturb her rhythm. But even as she moved, there was a subtle awareness in her posture, a quiet intelligence that noted his reactions, his curiosity, and the flicker of surprise in his eyes. The millionaire took a deep breath, leaning back in his seat. For the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of uncertainty. He had expected to be in control, to see a predictable response, to have his assumptions confirmed. Instead, he was seeing something he had not anticipated. This young waitress, whom he had assumed was simple, ordinary, and perhaps naive, was demonstrating a depth and steadiness that made him pause and reflect. In that moment, the diner seemed to shrink around them, the noise fading slightly as he focused on her. It was not just a test anymore. It was an encounter that challenged his perspective, one that required him to see beyond appearances, beyond assumptions, and beyond his own ego. And he realized, though he would not admit it yet, that this quiet young woman might teach him something he had not expected to learn that morning. As the morning continued, the sun climbed higher, filling the diner with warm light. The waitress moved from table to table, her attention unwavering, her smile constant. And the millionaire, sitting near the window, watched her with a mixture of fascination, curiosity, and a growing sense of humility. He had come to test, to observe, to assert his own confidence. Instead, he was on the verge of a lesson he had not anticipated, a reminder that intelligence, grace, and wisdom often come from the most unexpected places, and that true understanding is earned, not assumed. The diner's atmosphere remained calm, but an unspoken tension lingered near the window where the millionaire had taken his seat. He watched the waitress with keen interest, trying to understand her composure, to figure out the source of her confidence. Each time she moved from table to table, filling orders and answering questions with a polite smile, he felt a subtle frustration. It was not that she was rude or defiant. It was that she did not react the way he had expected. She seemed entirely unshaken by his presence, entirely in control of her space, and entirely unaffected by his attempts to test her. He decided to continue to see if he could provoke a reaction, a slip of some kind. He leaned slightly forward in his seat, placing his hands on the table with deliberate care, and asked a question meant to challenge her understanding. "Do you really know everything about this menu? Can you tell me why certain dishes are paired the way they are? Or are you just repeating what someone taught you?" The waitress looked at him with steady eyes, tilting her head slightly in acknowledgement. "I'm not claiming to know everything," she replied, her voice calm and even. "But I've learned what works together and why the chef chooses certain combinations. It's not just about following instructions. It's about understanding flavors and making sure the diner has a good experience." Her answer was simple but confident. It was not defensive and it was not boastful. It was clear she had thought about the question and provided an honest response. The millionaire felt a flicker of surprise. He had expected hesitation, uncertainty, perhaps even confusion. Instead, he found clarity and competence, delivered without any hint of fear or self-doubt. He decided to increase the challenge, leaning back in his seat with a small smile that suggested amusement. "What if I asked for something unusual, something that's not on the menu? Could you handle that?" She met his gaze without hesitation. "We can usually accommodate special requests," she said. "It might take a little extra time and I'd need to check with the kitchen, but I'll make sure it's done correctly. It's important that the customer is satisfied." Her calmness was disarming. The millionaire had anticipated difficulty, perhaps a flustered response, and instead found patience, clarity, and professionalism. He began to realize that she was not simply following instructions. She was thinking, analyzing, and solving problems in real time. He decided to press further, choosing a more personal approach. "Do you ever get frustrated with people? Some customers are difficult, some make mistakes, some don't appreciate your effort. Does that ever bother you?" The waitress paused for a moment, considering her response carefully. "Everyone makes mistakes," she said thoughtfully. "Some people don't notice the effort, some don't say thank you. But I focus on doing my best and helping people enjoy their experience. That's what matters to me. I can't control how others act, but I can control how I respond." Her words were simple but profound. The millionaire felt a twinge of humility. He had entered the diner thinking he was testing her intelligence, assuming she would falter under scrutiny. Instead, she demonstrated insight and perspective far beyond what he had expected. It was not just her efficiency or her knowledge of the menu. It was her understanding of people, her ability to remain composed and considerate in the face of challenges. He leaned forward again, curious and increasingly engaged. "What about your own mistakes? Have you ever made an error and felt embarrassed or frustrated?" She smiled faintly, a quiet acknowledgement of the question. "Of course, everyone makes mistakes at some point. The important thing is to learn from them, fix them if you can, and keep moving forward. Dwelling on it doesn't help anyone." The millionaire nodded slowly. Her responses were not rehearsed or defensive. They were honest and thoughtful. She had a perspective on life that he rarely encountered, one grounded in experience, reflection, and humility. He felt a subtle shift in his own thoughts. He had come to test someone, to assert his own superiority, and he was beginning to see that the lesson might be his rather than hers. The waitress moved on to another table, taking orders from a young couple and guiding them with patience and warmth. She remembered the small details, the way the woman preferred extra sauce, the way the man liked his drink cold. She engaged with them naturally, without any hint that she was aware of the scrutiny from the millionaire. Yet there was a quiet awareness in her eyes that suggested she noticed everything. The millionaire watched her closely, analyzing each interaction. He had assumed that intelligence and competence were visible through formal education, wealth, or status, but he was witnessing something different. Here was a person who understood people, who handled complexity with ease, and who displayed an innate wisdom that came from experience rather than instruction. He found himself both intrigued and challenged. He decided to test her further, posing a scenario that required critical thinking. "Imagine a customer is unhappy with their meal," he said. "They're upset, maybe even rude. How would you handle it?" She did not hesitate. "I would listen to their concern, understand why they're unhappy, and try to find a solution that works for them and the kitchen. I would remain calm, polite, and professional. The goal is to resolve the issue, not to argue or win. People respond better to understanding than to confrontation." Her answer was practical and insightful. The millionaire realized he had been underestimating the depth of her understanding. She was not simply a waitress. She was a problem solver, someone who could navigate challenges with composure and intelligence. He felt a growing respect for her, even as he had come with the intent to test her. As the conversation continued, he found himself reflecting on his own behavior. He had entered the diner with confidence, expecting to assert control and perhaps amuse himself at her expense. Instead, he was learning something important. Confidence alone does not equal understanding, and wealth does not guarantee insight. He was beginning to see that humility and attentiveness could teach lessons that status and arrogance never could. The waitress moved gracefully between tables, her attention never wavering, her smile never faltering. She spoke to each customer with care, responding to questions, accommodating requests, and handling challenges with ease. The millionaire observed her, noting how effortlessly she maintained control, how naturally she commanded respect without demanding it, and how quietly powerful her presence was. He decided to try one final test for the morning. "Do you think someone like me, someone who has wealth and influence, always understands what's best?" he asked. "Or could there be a lesson in humility for me?" She looked at him directly, her eyes steady, and replied, "Wealth and influence do not always teach understanding. The people who truly know how to handle life, people, and challenges are often the ones you least expect. Everyone can learn and everyone can teach. It's just a matter of listening and observing." Her words struck him deeply. He felt a mixture of surprise, respect, and reflection. He had entered the diner thinking he would be the teacher, but he was beginning to understand that he might be the student. He had underestimated someone who appeared ordinary, someone he assumed would be easily impressed or intimidated, and in doing so, he was learning a valuable lesson about judgment, perception, and humility. The morning passed, and the diner's atmosphere returned to its usual rhythm. The waitress continued her work, moving from table to table with grace and efficiency, never allowing the millionaire's presence to disrupt her flow. And the millionaire, seated near the window, watched and listened, increasingly aware that his assumptions had been challenged and that his understanding of people had been expanded. By the time the noon rush began, the millionaire was no longer thinking about testing her. He was thinking about what he had observed, what he had learned, and the quiet strength of someone who handled life with composure, intelligence, and empathy. He realized that he had underestimated the power of calm observation, thoughtful response, and genuine care for others. The roles he had assumed, teacher and student, were beginning to blur, and he could feel the first hints of transformation in his own perspective. The waitress, unaware of the deep effect she had on him, continued her work with her usual poise. She smiled, served, and assisted, demonstrating the kind of skill and presence that went beyond simple competence. She had the ability to teach lessons without raising her voice, to inspire respect without demanding it, and to command attention without seeking it. And in doing so, she had already begun to change the way the millionaire saw not only her but the world around him. As the day unfolded, it became clear that this encounter was more than a brief interaction in a diner. It was a moment of insight, a reminder that intelligence, wisdom, and strength often come from unexpected places, and that true understanding is earned through observation, reflection, and humility. The millionaire, who had walked in expecting to assert control and amusement, was instead quietly being shown the power of patience, insight, and human connection. The lunch rush had begun, and the diner was buzzing with the sound of conversation, clinking dishes, and the hiss of the grill. Despite the chaos, the waitress moved effortlessly among the tables, taking orders and serving meals with a quiet confidence that seemed almost natural. Her movements were precise and purposeful, but there was also a warmth in the way she interacted with each customer, a subtle attentiveness that made people feel seen and appreciated. The millionaire watched her closely from his booth near the window. He had come expecting to maintain control, to assert his superiority, but as the morning had unfolded, he realized that the situation was no longer so simple. The waitress had handled his questions, challenges, and subtle tests with ease, and in doing so, had begun to shift the balance in ways he had not anticipated. He was intrigued, but he also felt a flicker of uncertainty. She was intelligent, composed, and observant, and her insight into human behavior was evident in the way she managed each interaction. Curious to understand more about her perspective, he decided to engage her directly in a different way. He called her over with a polite but measured tone. "I have a question for you," he said, leaning slightly forward, his fingers interlaced on the table. "If you were in charge of this diner, what would you change or improve?" She considered the question carefully, not rushing her answer. "I think the diner is good as it is," she said, her voice steady and calm. "But if I were in charge, I would focus on how we make each customer feel welcomed and appreciated. The food is important, but people remember how they are treated more than anything else. Small gestures, attention to detail, listening carefully, those make the experience memorable." She paused for a moment, making eye contact. "I believe that's what makes a place truly special, more than wealth, status, or fancy decorations." The millionaire nodded slowly, taken aback by the thoughtfulness of her response. He had expected something practical, maybe operational or financial, but her answer was about people. He realized that she was speaking from experience, from observation, and from a place of genuine understanding. Her words carried weight not because they were dramatic, but because they were true. He decided to challenge her further, testing her ability to think on her feet. Imagine a customer comes in, angry and impatient. They are rude to the staff and demanding beyond reason. What would you do? The waitress met his gaze, unflinching. "I would stay calm," she said. "I would listen to their concern and try to understand why they are upset. I would not argue or react with frustration. Instead, I would focus on finding a solution that works for them while respecting the kitchen and the staff. People respond better to understanding and patience than to anger or power," she added with quiet confidence. "And sometimes, the way we handle difficult situations teaches more than any rule or instruction ever could." He leaned back in his seat, a mix of admiration and surprise crossing his features. He had expected someone flustered, someone who might crumble under pressure, and instead he found clarity, calmness, and intelligence. She was not just handling the situation. She was demonstrating leadership and insight in real time. As she moved away to serve another table, he found himself reflecting on his own actions and expectations. He had come into the diner assuming that wealth, authority, and confidence would automatically make him the teacher in this situation. Yet here was someone who had never claimed superiority, never flaunted her skills, and never demanded attention. And she was already teaching him lessons in patience, understanding, and humility. The waitress returned with a notepad, taking an order from a middle-aged couple who were celebrating a small milestone in their lives. She engaged them with warmth, asking questions that made them feel important and heard. She remembered small details from previous visits, offering personalized recommendations and showing genuine care. The millionaire watched her closely, noticing the way people responded to her presence. They smiled more, relaxed more, and seemed happier simply because she was attentive and present. He felt a subtle shift within himself. The confidence he had relied on so heavily, the sense of superiority he had assumed, was beginning to feel less relevant. He realized that competence was not about wealth or status. It was about understanding, awareness, and the ability to connect with people authentically. The waitress embodied these qualities effortlessly. Intrigued and perhaps a little humbled, he decided to test her one last time. "Do you ever feel that people underestimate you?" he asked. "Do they assume you're not capable or knowledgeable because of your role here?" She smiled softly, a mix of amusement and understanding. "Sometimes," she admitted. "But that's not something I focus on. I know my abilities and I know what I can handle. I don't need others to validate me. My work, my actions, and the way I treat people are enough. In fact, being underestimated can be an advantage. It allows people to see the results without bias or expectation." Her answer struck him profoundly. She was not defensive, and she did not need recognition. She had confidence grounded in understanding and experience, not in ego or appearance. He realized that her intelligence and capability were evident not because she flaunted them, but because she applied them consistently, quietly, and effectively. The diner's midday crowd was now fully engaged, but the millionaire found his attention fixed entirely on her. He observed how she handled multiple orders, managed timing, and kept track of each table's needs. She moved with a rhythm that was both efficient and graceful, never losing composure, never letting frustration show. Each interaction, each decision, revealed layers of competence and insight that he had not anticipated. He reflected on his own life, on the assumptions he had made about intelligence, success, and authority. He realized that he had equated wealth and status with understanding, forgetting that true wisdom often comes from experience, observation, and patience. Here was someone who had never claimed to be extraordinary, yet she demonstrated qualities that he admired and perhaps even envied. The waitress moved to another table, this one with a small child who was shy and hesitant. She knelt slightly to be at eye level, speaking gently and asking questions that invited participation. The child began to smile, relaxing in her presence. The millionaire watched, noticing how her empathy and attentiveness created connection effortlessly. He realized that this skill, this ability to read people and respond appropriately, was rare and valuable, and he had underestimated it because it did not come with grand gestures or loud announcements. He felt a growing respect for her, but he also felt a certain humility, an awareness that he had much to learn. The morning had begun as a test, a way for him to assert his own confidence and curiosity. By midday, he understood that he had walked into a situation far more complex and enlightening than he had anticipated. The waitress had become more than a subject of observation. She had become a teacher, showing him through example what patience, intelligence, and human connection truly meant. He decided to try one final observation, a subtle test not of knowledge but of character. He dropped a small, folded note on the table, pretending it was accidental, and watched as she noticed it. She picked it up without a word, scanning the contents discreetly, and then handed it back politely, addressing the concern or question it contained with tact and thoughtfulness. He realized that even in unexpected situations, she remained composed, insightful, and considerate. The lunch crowd began to thin, and the diner returned to a quieter pace. The millionaire sat back, taking a deep breath, reflecting on the morning's events. He had entered the diner expecting to assert control, to test someone he assumed was ordinary, and perhaps to amuse himself in the process. Instead, he had encountered intelligence, composure, and insight that challenged his assumptions, expanded his perspective, and made him reconsider his own behavior. The waitress continued her work with grace and efficiency, unaware of the full impact she had on him. She moved from table to table, attentive to every need, patient in every interaction, and confident in her understanding of people and the world around her. Her presence was a quiet demonstration of competence, empathy, and wisdom, qualities that were often overlooked but deeply respected by those who truly observed. By the time the afternoon settled in, the millionaire understood that the morning had been a turning point. He had come to test someone he assumed was simple, ordinary, and unremarkable. Instead, he had been challenged, observed, and taught by someone whose strength and intelligence lay not in wealth or status, but in understanding, patience, and authentic human connection. He realized that true insight is not always obvious, and that those who appear ordinary often possess extraordinary qualities that can teach lessons no wealth or authority can provide. As he watched the waitress move gracefully through the diner, he felt a quiet appreciation for her skills, her wisdom, and her presence. The morning had begun with a test, but it was clear now who had learned the most. He had come to challenge her, but she had quietly, effortlessly, and profoundly begun to teach him the value of humility, observation, and the deep power of human connection. The afternoon in the diner had a rhythm of its own. The chatter of customers, the clatter of dishes, and the occasional hiss from the grill created a familiar soundtrack that everyone inside was used to. The waitress moved among the tables with the same calm efficiency she always had, but there was an extra layer of awareness today. She noticed the millionaire, seated near the window, watching her closely, and she understood that this encounter was different from any she had experienced before. He had come expecting to assert his confidence, to test her, and perhaps to enjoy a sense of superiority. But as the day progressed, he had found himself quietly observing, learning, and being challenged in ways he had not anticipated. There was a shift in his demeanor now, a softening of his smugness and a growing curiosity, as if he had realized that wealth and status were not guarantees of understanding or insight. The waitress approached his table with a polite smile. "Can I get you anything else?" she asked, her tone professional yet warm. She did not speak with condescension or hesitation. She simply offered her assistance, ready to respond to his needs but also prepared to guide him gently if necessary. He looked up at her, and for a moment, he studied her face, the calm confidence in her eyes. "I've been thinking," he said, leaning back slightly. "You've handled everything today with remarkable poise. I came here expecting to see how someone like you would react under pressure, but I think I'm the one learning something." The waitress tilted her head slightly, acknowledging his words with a quiet grace. "Everyone can learn something new," she replied. "It doesn't matter who you are, how much money you have, or what position you hold. There's always room to see things differently, to understand things more clearly, and to grow." Her words were simple, but they carried weight. The millionaire felt a subtle shift within himself, a recognition that his assumptions had been challenged. He had expected to teach, but he was realizing that the lesson was his to learn. He felt an unfamiliar humility, a quiet acknowledgement that he had underestimated someone based on appearances and assumptions. He decided to explore this further. "Tell me," he said, "what do you think makes someone truly successful? People like me are taught to believe that wealth, influence, and confidence are the markers of success. But watching you, I feel like there's more to it than that." The waitress considered his question carefully. She placed a small notepad on the table, resting her hands lightly on top. "Success is not just about what you have or what people think of you," she said slowly. "It's about how you handle challenges, how you treat people, and how you learn from every experience. A person can have everything in the world and still lack understanding, compassion, or wisdom. True success comes from using what you have to make a positive difference, and from growing as a person through every encounter." The millionaire nodded, feeling the truth in her words. He realized that he had been operating under a narrow definition of success, one measured by possessions, status, and recognition. Here was someone who demonstrated understanding, patience, and insight, qualities that could not be bought or demanded, but earned through awareness and reflection. He felt a sense of admiration, tinged with humility, as he recognized the depth of her perspective. She moved to another table briefly, assisting a family with young children. She guided them patiently, ensuring everyone's needs were met while maintaining a calm and organized presence. The millionaire observed how seamlessly she managed multiple responsibilities, how she responded to challenges without frustration, and how she maintained a consistent sense of grace. It was clear that her strength lay not in outward appearances but in her ability to navigate complexity with composure and empathy. Returning to his table, she continued, "Sometimes, people focus so much on appearances, wealth, or power that they miss what really matters. The way you handle situations, the way you treat others, and the lessons you take from experiences are far more important." Even small acts of understanding or kindness can have a lasting impact. Her words resonated deeply with him. He had always measured success by external markers, by what others could see or admire. Today, he was learning that the most valuable lessons often came from observation, reflection, and quiet guidance. He felt the weight of his assumptions lifting, replaced by an awareness of what truly mattered. The waitress moved to another table, attending to a customer who had accidentally spilled a drink. She handled the situation with a calm efficiency, cleaning up the mess and reassuring the customer with a gentle smile. The millionaire watched, noticing the care and thoughtfulness in her actions. She was not seeking recognition or praise. She was simply focused on doing what was right and necessary. It was a lesson in humility and practical wisdom, one that he had not anticipated but deeply appreciated. He leaned back in his seat, reflecting on the day. He realized that he had come into the diner with a sense of superiority, expecting to test someone who appeared ordinary. Instead, he had been quietly observed, guided, and taught by someone whose insight, patience, and composure surpassed his own assumptions. He felt a sense of respect, a recognition of the value of humility, and an understanding that true learning often comes from unexpected sources. The waitress returned to his table once more, placing a small cup of coffee in front of him. She spoke softly, with a tone that was both kind and deliberate. "Life teaches lessons in many ways," she said. "Sometimes the people you least expect to learn from have the most to offer. The important thing is to pay attention, to listen, and to take those lessons to heart." He nodded, feeling the weight of her words. He understood now that his assumptions had been flawed, that his perspective had been limited, and that he had much to learn about people, life, and himself. He realized that intelligence and understanding were not measured by wealth, status, or confidence, but by awareness, empathy, and the ability to grow through experience. As the afternoon continued, the diner began to quiet down. The lunch rush had ended, and the remaining customers were engaged in conversation, enjoying the comfort of the familiar setting. The waitress moved gracefully among the tables, attending to each customer with care and attention, her presence both calming and empowering. The millionaire observed her, feeling a sense of gratitude and reflection. He had come seeking to assert control, to test someone he assumed was ordinary, and perhaps to confirm his own superiority. Instead, he had encountered patience, insight, and wisdom that challenged his assumptions and expanded his perspective. He realized that the most valuable lessons often come from unexpected encounters, from people who act with integrity and awareness rather than seeking recognition or power. He decided to speak again, wanting to acknowledge the impact of the encounter. "I came here thinking I would be teaching," he said, his voice quieter than before. "But I see now that I've been learning. You've shown me that understanding, patience, and the way we treat others are far more important than any measure of wealth or status." The waitress smiled softly, her expression calm and sincere. "I'm glad you see that," she said. "Everyone has the ability to learn and grow, no matter who they are. Sometimes, the most important lessons come from moments we least expect, and from people we might overlook." Her words lingered in his mind, a quiet reminder of the encounter's significance. He felt a sense of clarity and humility, recognizing that he had underestimated the power of observation, reflection, and human connection. The lessons he had received today were subtle yet profound, shaping not only his understanding of others but also his understanding of himself. The afternoon sunlight streamed through the windows, casting a warm glow over the diner. The waitress moved with effortless grace, attending to each customer with attentiveness and care. The millionaire watched her, feeling a deep respect and an awareness that this experience had changed him. He had come seeking control and amusement, but he had left with a newfound appreciation for the quiet strength, insight, and wisdom that often reside in the most unexpected places. As the day continued, the diner maintained its rhythm of conversation, laughter, and the clatter of dishes. The waitress continued her work, embodying patience, intelligence, and empathy in every interaction. The millionaire reflected on the lessons he had learned, recognizing that true understanding is earned through observation, reflection, and humility. He understood now that the encounter had been more than a simple test. It had been a moment of learning, growth, and insight that would stay with him long after he left the diner. By the end of the afternoon, the diner had returned to a quieter pace. The waitress moved through the remaining tables with calm efficiency, her presence reassuring and empowering. The millionaire remained at his booth, contemplating the experience, feeling a sense of gratitude and humility. He had entered the diner expecting to assert authority, to observe and evaluate, but he had discovered something far more valuable: the quiet power of human insight, patience, and understanding. He realized that the true measure of a person's character is not found in wealth, status, or confidence alone, but in the way they handle challenges, interact with others, and learn from every moment. The waitress had shown him, without ego or pretense, the importance of humility, empathy, and thoughtful reflection. He understood now that the encounter had been a lesson not in service or decorum, but in life itself, a lesson that would stay with him far beyond the walls of the diner. As the afternoon sun began to soften, the diner settled into a quiet rhythm. The last of the lunch crowd had left, leaving a few regulars lingering over coffee and conversation. The waitress moved among the tables with calm efficiency, clearing plates, pouring drinks, and attending to every detail with the same attentive care she had shown all day. There was an ease to her movements, a quiet confidence that came from experience, and a deep understanding of people and situations. The millionaire sat near the window, observing her with a newfound respect. The sense of superiority he had carried when he first walked in had vanished, replaced by a thoughtful humility. He had entered the diner expecting to test someone he assumed was ordinary, to assert his own intelligence and confidence. Instead, he had learned lessons in patience, understanding, and human connection that he had not anticipated. He watched as she approached a family table, kneeling slightly to speak with a shy child, gently coaxing a smile and a response. Her empathy and attentiveness were natural, effortless, and yet profoundly effective. He realized that her ability to read people, respond to their needs, and maintain composure in all situations was a skill far more valuable than any measure of wealth or status he had ever achieved. The millionaire reflected on his own actions and assumptions. He had underestimated her, assumed she would be flustered or intimidated by him, and expected to be the teacher in this encounter. But she had quietly reversed the roles, demonstrating insight, patience, and wisdom without raising her voice or demanding recognition. He understood now that true intelligence and strength are often subtle, observed through actions and character rather than announced through words or appearances. He decided to speak to her one last time before leaving. "I've learned a lot today," he said softly. "I came in thinking I would teach, but I see now that the lesson has been mine. You've shown me the value of patience, empathy, and thoughtful observation. You've taught me that understanding people is far more important than any measure of wealth or status." The waitress looked at him with a calm, kind smile. "Everyone has the ability to teach and to learn," she said. "Sometimes the lessons come from unexpected places, and the most important thing is to pay attention and take them to heart. You've been open enough to see that today, and that in itself is a valuable step." Her words carried a gentle wisdom that resonated deeply with him. He realized that he had been so focused on proving himself, on asserting his knowledge and experience, that he had overlooked the simplest and most profound truths about human interaction. True understanding comes from observation, empathy, and humility, qualities that she had demonstrated effortlessly. He stood, gathering his belongings, feeling a sense of gratitude and reflection. He had come seeking control, amusement, and perhaps a sense of superiority, but he was leaving with a renewed perspective and a quiet sense of respect. The lessons he had received were subtle but powerful, shaping the way he thought about himself, others, and the world around him. As he approached the door, he paused and looked back at her. "Thank you," he said sincerely, "for your patience, your insight, and for reminding me what really matters." The waitress nodded politely, her smile unchanged, her presence calm and reassuring. "You're welcome," she replied. "Every encounter has the potential to teach us something, if we're willing to see it." He stepped out into the sunlight, feeling a mixture of humility and appreciation. The experience had been transformative, a reminder that appearances can be deceiving and that wisdom and understanding are often found in unexpected places. He realized that he had entered the diner expecting to be the observer, the teacher, and the judge. Instead, he had been the student, quietly learning from someone whose strength lay in patience, empathy, and insight. The waitress returned to her work, attending to the few remaining customers with the same care and attention she had shown all day. Her movements were calm, deliberate, and thoughtful, demonstrating a quiet mastery of her craft and an understanding of people that was both natural and profound. She did not seek recognition, applause, or validation, but her impact was evident in the way those around her responded with respect, trust, and warmth. The diner itself seemed to reflect the calm and attentive presence of its staff. The atmosphere was warm, inviting, and familiar, a place where people felt valued, seen, and cared for. The millionaire's departure did not disrupt the rhythm. Instead, it left a subtle sense of reflection, a quiet acknowledgement of the lessons learned and the impact of the encounter. As he walked away, he thought about the day, the interactions, and the lessons he had received. He realized that humility, patience, and understanding are qualities that cannot be bought or demanded. They are cultivated through experience, observation, and reflection. He understood that true strength and intelligence are often understated, observed in the way someone navigates challenges, interacts with others, and maintains composure under pressure. The waitress continued her work, never aware of the full impact she had on him. She moved gracefully among the tables, attentive to every detail, calm and confident in her actions. She demonstrated a mastery of human connection, showing that true influence comes not from authority or status, but from understanding, empathy, and the ability to respond thoughtfully to the needs of others. The regulars in the diner began to notice the small changes in the atmosphere, the attentiveness, and the care with which every interaction was handled. The story of the day, though subtle, began to spread quietly among the patrons, highlighting the waitress's insight, composure, and quiet strength. She had demonstrated that the most valuable lessons often come from unexpected encounters, and that those who appear ordinary may possess extraordinary wisdom. The millionaire reflected on the experience as he returned to his own life, carrying with him a new perspective and a sense of humility. He realized that wealth, status, and confidence are limited in their ability to teach or define true understanding. The encounter had shown him the value of observation, empathy, and reflection, and he understood that these lessons would shape his interactions, decisions, and perceptions long after the day had ended. As evening approached, the diner settled into a peaceful rhythm. The waitress moved among the remaining tables, attending to each customer with care and attention. She demonstrated the quiet power of competence, empathy, and understanding, leaving a lasting impression on those who observed her actions and presence. The millionaire's visit had begun as a test, a curiosity, and an assertion of confidence. It ended as a profound lesson in humility, human understanding, and the subtle yet powerful impact of thoughtful action. He left the diner not just with a full meal, but with a renewed awareness of what truly matters in life: patience, empathy, observation, and the willingness to learn from every encounter, especially those we least expect. The day drew to a close, and the diner's lights cast a warm glow over the tables. The waitress continued her work with the same calm efficiency, demonstrating that true strength and insight often reside in quiet, thoughtful action rather than in appearances or authority. She had taught a lesson without words, without ego, and without demand, showing that the most profound learning often comes from observing, reflecting, and engaging with the world with patience and empathy. And in that small, bustling diner, an ordinary day had become extraordinary, leaving behind lessons that would resonate far beyond the walls of the building, shaping understanding, perspective, and appreciation for the quiet power of insight, humility, and human connection.